Time do I have, Kieran? Firstly, I want to welcome Minister McGrath to the House. This is a hugely, I think, significant and important debate, and I'm glad to be given the opportunity to contribute to it. I just hope it wasn't, we'll say, on the Thursday, in my view, it should have been given prime spot, one of the prime spots time-wise. Secondly, Minister McGrath you bring huge credibility to this brief. You have walked the walk all your life. You understand it implicitly. And I think you bring a range of skills, both in terms of intellect and more practically of what it is like to have to deal with disabilities over a lifetime, and I want to commend you on that. Minister McGrath will know my interest in this. I'm very involved with the various disabilities organisations. I'm particularly very keen on the Leader and Advocacy students in LIT in Limerick. The Minister was at their most recent awards. I think you're coming down on the 19th of June. They're very excited about your pending arrival. Martina Nealon is one of the unsung heroes, and there are many of them in the disabilities area who works with this group, and they are coming from all the disability services in the Midwest. They're coming from the Dorset Charity, Bonmore, coming from St. Gabriel's, they're coming from St. Joseph's Foundation, and the Minister will be well aware of this. And following on from that, I suppose I want to deal with a practical thing. There was a national platform of self-advocates held. The Minister, they hosted, I don't know, Minister, was it self or themselves, hosted a meeting on the 30th of January in the AV room to be all attended. It really was an inspiring day. It was people with disabilities advocating for themselves. And they left us know in no uncertain terms the areas that were good and the areas that they felt could be improved. I suppose I just want to deal with a couple of those. Firstly, Minister, the target of being 3% to 6% by over the next 4 to 5 years. I don't know, Minister, if you've given what the figure is at the moment. Maybe I didn't see it in the speech. That, to me, should be a minimum target. We have to reach that target. How do we get there? And I think, coupled with that, Minister, I don't think there's any target on the private sector, but I believe there is a willingness in the private sector to embrace people with disabilities. The question is, how do we create an environment, and how do we create the type of structures to enable employers to be able to employ people with disabilities, and more particularly with people with disabilities to be able to assimilate into the setup. I see many people now coming in programs here in Leinster House, and it's very welcome. I think they're a huge addition. And a couple of points. Number one, JobsBridge gave internships more than, just didn't give it a particularly good name. But internship programs, by their if they're structured properly, are a fantastic introduction into the work environment. I welcome the fact they're being looked at. I think certainly in the area of disabilities, they need to be furthered. I note that the Department of Public Expenditure Reform are looking at it. It's something, Minister, that maybe could be extended to the private sector. And at the meeting on the 30th of January, a number of items came up, and I very much, the Minister, they were around engaging with the employer groups, the likes of ISME, the likes of IBEC, the chambers, to see what could be done to put supports for employers and disabilities. I know, Minister, work is underway. Obviously, when there's meetings, we'd very much love to be involved. A particular area for myself was the whole area of career guidance, and I know the Department of Education are doing a comprehensive review in that area, right? For me, really, at times, a lot of these measures are practical. I don't think they should be overcomplicated. What do you want here? You want someone with disabilities, that they're, like anyone else, that their CV is structured to accentuate the skill sets they have, that an employer can see very quickly by looking down as to how they'd benefit by employing them. And we're moving very much into that area. The Miscellaneous Disability Provisions Bill 2016 is currently before the Dáil Éireann, and I expect it will come before us pretty quickly. A couple of positives, really. I feel that these changes you've made to the disability allowance are to be very welcomed. The increase in disregard to €300 is very welcomed. The key feature here is, and we come across it quite often, that people on disability allowance are absolutely petrified to go off the disability allowance for fear they'll never get back on it again. And that they'll suddenly have a situation, Minister, whereby that they give up their disability. They're borderline as to whether they're actually capable of going back to work or not. Suddenly they go back to work and they're not actually able to function. And they turn around then and they actually are they're not available for workers not capable of working. And at the same time, they find it extremely difficult to get back on disability allowance. And I noticed that's being looked at, probably needs constant review, because it's something that comes up quite often. The area of so I suppose in summary, this is to be very welcomed, the legislation coming before us. What I really want to see is the one size doesn't fit all. And I think we have to look at inventive, imaginative ways to enable people with disabilities to be able to go into the workplace. That may mean, Minister, that they may only actually, may suit them to only work maybe 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week. Equally, I believe there is a willingness amongst many employers to take on people with disabilities, but once again, there is a factor of they're in business, they're worried about the impact it will have. We have to provide them the reassurance around this area. It's down to training. There may even be a case, Minister, that I noticed in there in terms of training. So if we identify areas, and the one thing that came up with the Advocacy national platform on our meeting of the 3rd of January, VideoParliament was that they were absolutely fed up with the fact that they were being pigeonholed into certain jobs. And many of them felt that there were other tasks that they could do. We need to look at ways, both in the public and the private sector, of expanding the roles that would be available for people with disability. That might involve training, but I think one of the key elements to conduit through it is internships. One of the key areas is to have that formal engagement, Minister, with the employers groups. You might let me know where that's at. One of the areas would be to set up a designated area to allow them to get CV training, proper CVs, allow them training, and that we look at the disability allowance and maybe, Minister, to look at the invalidity pension to see is there ways to maybe relax that a little bit in terms of people doing a bit more rehabilitative work. Right? That's not a fact. Do you know what? I won't move into that space because it's really disability allowance is the key area. So look, I'm delighted to contribute. Look forward to hearing your views on where things are at, and you'll know my commitment on this area has been a lifelong one, and I commend you on your work to date.
Thank you, Secretary.